We'll get started because I'm sensitive to the fact that everyone is quite busy. So I wanted to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here, especially on short notice. I'm Natasha Tokowicz. I'm Associate Dean for Equity, Faculty Development, and Community Engagement. I'm also a professor in the Psychology Department. The goal for today is that I'm going to go through some ideas about working with undergraduate teaching assistants and leave lots of time for questions and suggestions. And I'd especially love to hear from folks from different departments who can share a different perspective, either in terms of their suggestions for working with undergraduate teaching assistants or for questions about, what may or may not work from what I shared in my portion. So my background in working with undergraduate teaching assistants is that I've done it most of my career, so 20 something, 4 years or so. And I mainly have used this as an experience for helping the students in my large lecture course, the 400-person Intro to Psych course, where working with undergraduate teaching assistants is a great way for those students to have a more personal touch and a more strong connection to folks in the class. I've also had undergraduate teaching assistants in 2 honors courses that were much smaller and had more writing. So I've worked with undergraduate TAs in a range of sizes of classes. And I will talk a little bit more about things that I've had them do and things like that and what the sort of parameters are. So starting out, why would one want to work with UTAs? So I think some of these are probably obvious, but I just want to lay them out before we go further. So it's a great educational experience for the UTA. They learn a lot about the material, but they also learn a lot about teaching and pedagogy and why faculty make the decisions that they make. I think this is not clear to undergraduates all the time. And so they do learn, I think, a lot about how we think. And this is helpful if they're considering being a faculty member someday. Faculty learn a lot too. We learn a lot from the undergraduates about how they think and how they perceive material in a class. So it's actually a great learning experience for faculty. Learned tons from my undergrad TAs. It increases a sense of community or belonging in a department or program. I find that the UTAs can really create their own little community, but also then feel very connected to the department. And I think that can be really important, especially right now. The students in a class might be more likely to turn to a peer for information, right? So we, in the classes like I run with 400 students, we often have a graduate TA, but I find that the undergraduates in the class feel more comfortable turning to another undergraduate for information. And sometimes actually the undergraduates have better and more relevant information about the wide range of questions that the students have, particularly when the students are first-year students and grad students just haven't had the same experiences on campus. So it's a really great resource for your students in your class. And of course, it can help lighten the faculty members' workload, but you do have to do some work, of course, to make this all happen. It's not for free. And it does create a great team environment. And so I think that, working with multiple UTAs or even just with one UTA can be a really nice way of doing your class. I find that it's a more enjoyable teaching experience. And I think that's true for other faculty I know who've worked with undergraduate TAs. I wanted to mention a couple of things that I think are best practices, and I have done some literature reading about this, so it's not only based on my own experience, but it very much echoes my own experience. I do think it's a very good idea to have a plan in place and then revisit it from time to time. And by plan, I mean, sit with the person at the beginning and say, these are my expectations, right? Like, I expect you to come to class. Like, I expect you to do these things. And then you can revisit it and say, okay, this is not actually necessary. This other thing is, and you can change things. But I think being very upfront about your expectations can be very helpful. I don't know that undergraduates always know what we're going to ask of them. Creating a contract or agreement can be very helpful in this realm so that you can just write everything down, go through it with them, and you can have them sign it or not, but just so that you've laid it out and handed them something or emailed them something so that they know what you're thinking. The UTA ideally should have already taken that specific class, preferably with the same instructor, and gotten a good grade. And what do I mean by good? That's a great question. The instructor really has to define good, and this may vary across classes, departments, programs. I mean, I think what you expect in intro psych is different from maybe like organic chemistry, right? So I will just say that in my own experience, I have expected that the person got an A of some sort. And I do prefer that they have taken it with me, but it doesn't have to be that they took it with me um, for the intro psych class. So that's where I've stood on my class. So what can the UTA do? Many, many things. It's almost, impossible to list all the things, but, you can be creative here. So they can write assignments, they can write exam questions. I do recommend that you have them write the assignment or questions like right after the relevant class, like or close to that in time so that material is fresh in their mind. I found that doing that like led to more accurate questions or more relevant questions. They can create study guides if that's something you use, or run study sessions where students will bring in questions, but they can answer them for them, or they can like do different games. Like some of mine did a Jeopardy game that they created where students had to answer questions. I do think you need to require them to attend class if you want them to do things like this so that they actually know the material. Otherwise, I do not think it will be as good, right? They won't really be able to answer the questions. They can pre-take exams or assignments to check for clarity, give you feedback and things like that. That has been incredibly helpful for me. They can help develop new activities, things like that. And they can meet individually with students or have office hours. This can be particularly helpful if you don't have a graduate TA for your class. So these are just some ideas. There are a lot. Big question. Can UTAs grade? Yes, but there is a caveat. So per Dietrich School policy, which is actually currently being revised, UTAs may grade, but only when the material has been anonymized by the faculty instructor before it's distributed to the UTAs. So the reason is we don't want students to be able to grade their peers' work and then possibly, maybe they know them, there could be some bias there. So we want to really make it so that they can't possibly, give a stronger or worse, perhaps, grade based on knowing the person. So the faculty instructor in this case would be the sole holder of linking information. And anybody who wants information about easy ways to do linking can ask in the question period, or I can email you, just send me a note or put your name in the chat and I can give you some information about easy ways to do linking. But the idea here is really just to find a way to make the material anonymous and then distribute it to the UTA or UTAs. And one tip I have here is to consider having multiple UTAs grade the same material based on some rubric perhaps, and then do follow-on grading, right? And then you would pay particular attention to areas where the multiple UTAs disagreed. And I've done that with essay exams and found it really, really an interesting way of grading. I look at all of them to make sure I agree with the grades, but I feel like it was a really good way of finding trickier essays to grade. And I do recommend pre-training on rubric grading. If you're doing rubrics, probably with anybody, they probably do that. But I think it can be really helpful in getting the UTAs together on the scores. So just a couple more tips and then we'll go into questions. So I do want to recommend that you make sure your UTAs are visible to your students. If you want them to be helpful, they need to know that they're there. So I recommend requiring them to come to class meetings, or at least some of the time, so that they know they're there. I have had UTAs who show up and we introduce them and they stand with me at the front of the class, and then the undergrads start asking them questions, and it's a very helpful thing. And then the last thing I want to mention is that, in terms of grading, because at least in our department, they get a grade. It's called directed teaching. We have them do some kind of formal self-reflection, and the literature does recommend that, does point out that formal self-reflection is kind of beneficial for the undergraduate TAs as part of their experience. And I think there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But I think in general, having the person reflect on what they've learned and taken away from the experience can be really useful. So I'm going to stop talking and open this up to questions and suggestions. Hi, Michelle.
Thanks, Natasha. This is great. And I've also had worked with UTAs. I started that during the pandemic when we went on Zoom, and I only had one because I taught a small class, 35. I found it extremely helpful. In fact, I had the same UTA for three different semesters because she was so great. And so, going into what are they called again? The group chats again in
Mhm.
Zoom. It's been a
Breakout
while.
rooms.
Yeah, breakout rooms. That was really great. So I agree with you. It's been a great experience, everything. But we're holding these workshops now because of a way in which maybe we can help. I'm the chair of a department, helping my colleagues deal with we expect to be greater, probably larger class sizes than expected. So a lot of my colleagues are going to be interested in the grading issue.
Yeah.
Um, Now, because Haitao at one of the chairs meetings mentioned that it was prohibited, I Googled again, and it does say, I'm also worried a bit about the legal consequences.
Yeah.
It does say on the guidelines, the Dietrich School guidelines for undergraduate teaching experience, it says there explicitly that, well, I guess it says they should not be involved in grading papers, quizzes, or exams.
So,
So
yeah.
if you could if you could clarify that, that would be
Happy to.
great.
Yes, no, thank you for your question. So, Adriana and I are currently, well, mostly Adriana, but we're currently working on rewriting those guidelines. So, when I mentioned that they're currently being rewritten, that those are the very guidelines that are currently being rewritten to reflect what I said. Basically, that exactly this, that UTAs may grade, but only when the material has been anonymized. So we're opening this up. And so the truth is that there had been a few instances when this had been permitted as like a pilot test in the past with express permission of John Twining. And a few of us in my department have done it before like this, with his permission to give it a try and see how it went. And it went fine. And then in the transition, this all sort of got lost, right? And it is critical, right, at this moment for the very reasons that you talked about, that we make a policy change so that more people are able to know about it and be able to implement this. So yes, I completely agree. This is at odds with the policy that is currently written on the website. However, we do expect that to change.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? By when do you think this new policy will be announced?
Oh, I think within the next week or so. Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you.
that's the goal. Um, okay, John.
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Sure,
Um, so this is kind of a technical thing, but
sure.
in film and media studies, partly because we're like a small department and everybody knows everybody, we've
Mhm.
been sort of semi-officially uh, guided to on Canvas make the UTA a student, give them student status rather than UTA status, because as UTA they can see grades.
Yeah,
So they shouldn't, so the feeling is they shouldn't even be able to see someone's grade. So
right.
does that kind of, is that pretty much the policy?
I would agree with that. Yes, they should not really be able to see grades for the same kind of reasons. Like if they can do too much in Canvas, they can really like view everybody's grade. That does violate the rules. So there are ways to like in the past, what I've done is let them be part of the course. I honestly don't remember if it was student or some other viewing kind of capacity. But what I did was I would have them do their blind scoring. I would put everything together and then I would relink the information and then upload the scores. So I did all the work of uploading. But with Excel, it's actually pretty quick. So I did it all just really like quickly in Excel. But that's a very important point to mention. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you.
I'm answering questions in the chat also here. So there was a question about how many UTAs would you recommend for a class of 140? I'm saying 1 to 2. I don't know if anyone would disagree with that. I think it kind of depends what you want them to do in terms of workload, right? If they're grading exams or if they're like, I don't know what you are having them do in the class. So I think it kind of depends. So Rachel, I don't know if you want to elaborate on what you're having them do. But if,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and thank you. So
Sure.
I'm brand new, so I have no idea what I'll have them do yet.
Uh-huh.
So this is all super new to me.
Yep.
So maybe I should just more be a fly on the wall today and just hear what everybody else is doing.
Sure, sure. I think one thing to consider, I guess, really to answer your question, what I would consider is what do I maybe want to have them do? And what is the easiest way to break down the work, right? So one thing to consider is if I want to have them grade essays or papers, like what is the reasonable workload for an undergraduate TA, knowing they can work maybe up to like 10 to 12 hours a week? So if you want to have them come to class, that's already, 3 hours. So then you've got like 7 hours left of work time per week for them, maximum if they do 3 credits. So you've got to figure out like how you want to distribute that work. And so what I would do is have usually, I think I had usually like 4 undergrad TAs for my 400-person class and would distribute things like they would each get like 100 of something roughly. And that unless I was having them multiply grade, but that was usually in a smaller class.
That makes so much sense. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Anisha.
Yes, I haven't used undergraduate TAs before, but I have a large class, it's around 175. I think this semester is increased than before. One undergraduate student was asking whether other student can be a UTA. So I have two graduate TAs. I wonder that I have a concern with the grading part. So you mean that we can't add UTS into the Canvas course, right?
They can be in Canvas, they just can't be listed as a TA, so that they can't see the grades.
Yeah, that so mean that undergraduate TA would be another student in that,
Right.
right? Okay. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thank you.
Sure thing. So someone asked to hear about easy ways to do linking for anonymous grading. So I will classify it this way. So how I have done this is I usually will take okay, so let me take 2 examples. So one is for an essay test in Canvas. So for the essay test, it will give you a like an Excel spreadsheet that you can download with all the essay answers. And so what I did was I just took, it says what the PeopleSoft number is and then the person's answer to the question. And you can look at this information and take away the PeopleSoft number. But so what I did was I put in a randomly generated number next to the PeopleSoft number. I made one copy for myself that has all of that information. And then I took away the PeopleSoft number and I gave it to the students with only the randomly generated number. So Excel will give you a randomly generated number, or you can just randomly make it up however you want. And then they did the scoring on just the Excel spreadsheet with the random number. So that's one way. And then when you get it back from them, you just go back and relink the information. There is a function in Excel. It's called VLOOKUP. I'm going to put it in the chat. Oops, if I can type. VLOOKUP will help you to reconnect information if you have a large class. And so VLOOKUP will basically help you reconnect it. If you have any trouble with VLOOKUP, email me. I have an easy tutorial on VLOOKUP for you. But it'll help you like reconnect the two numbers, right? So that's one way to do it. With papers, there's actually a function on almost all computers these days where you can take a folder and have it rename your files. And so you can like copy the names of the files so you know what order they're in. And then you have it rename all of them with like numbers. And then you create a linking from that. And then they do the numerical grading on the numerical files. And then you just relink it. Same thing, VLOOKUP. So that probably sounds very abstract. Happy to do another session later on like the ins and outs of the linking, but it is in fact quite easy. Deborah.
Hi, thank you. So my question is kind of specific.
Sure.
I'm wondering if UTAs can help count things that are pass-fail that go towards a grade without them being anonymized. Specifically, like what I do is I have my students as part of the participation grade write practice test questions, which are then used for our reviews. But they have to submit so many practice test questions to earn a certain participation grade. Does that have to be anonymized, or because basically they're just counting? They're like, is it submitted? Then yes.
I would not think so. I can double check with Adriana and let you know.
Okay.
But I would not count that as grading.
I didn't think so, but I'm like, technically it counts towards something, but it's like I said, it's more counting than evaluate. It's not
Yeah, it's more, I see it more in the realm of like attendance, right?
Yeah.
If you were taking attendance, you wouldn't call that grading, even though it counts toward their grade or something, right? I'll ask Adriana and let you know.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Someone asked, Andrew asked about, is there a threshold for class size and having a UTA? Can one TA be used for a class of 50, 65, 150? So I'm not 100% sure I'm interpreting your question correctly. So Andrew, please let me know if I'm not. But I think you can use one UTA for a class of various sizes. But I wouldn't use one UTA for multiple classes unless you're giving them individual credit for each of those classes. So I'm not sure if I answered.
Oh, yeah. Well, Natasha, I was just thinking, so if I have a class of 35 and I have one UTA, and let's say I ask them to hold office hours,
Right.
maybe let's just say 3 to 5 students might come to that office hour. But if it's a class of 300, 30 students might come to that office hour. So the student might have a line out their proverbial door.
Right.
So I was just wondering if the university has a cap saying one UTA can only be utilized for 50 students. If it's 100, then you need to have 2, then you need to have 3. Otherwise, because once again, holding office hours for 3 students to answer, exam questions is much different than if 30 students show up.
Absolutely. So what I would say, I don't believe there's a policy about this, but the only policy that exists is about the number of hours they can work. So I will say, I think it makes sense to, if you have a bigger class, have multiple people so that there are more opportunities to go to different people or for people to share the workload. So I would say, like, if you have a class of, 300, I would not only have one TA. But there is no hard and fast rule. Again, I think it kind of has to be based on how you think you're going to work with that person or those people and what they're going to be doing, because you also don't want them to be super bored. This is a thing that I will say, working with undergraduates in the lab and as teaching assistants, they don't like to be bored. They're there for an experience. And if there's not any work to be done, I think they can be very understimulated. So you want to kind of have a plan, have things for them to do. And you do also want to meet with them on a regular basis to keep up with them. And like the way I did that so that it wasn't, whole extra like set of meetings and everything, was to try to meet with them either before or after class. So that we had a meeting, like at least a half an hour to touch base every week or every other week as a team and work together on things. Sometimes we had to meet longer than that, but I think meeting regularly, keeping, everything together can be important to make sure things are running well. And then you can also find out like how many people came to your office hours, 30 or 3. So I think it can be important. But that's a really good question. I don't think there's any rules. Okay, there's also a great question in the chat about formal arrangements, right? So should it be done for a volunteer, per credit, formal UTA course, student worker? So we don't recommend voluntary because then people are not getting paid for their time in any way or compensated. So we would prefer like independent, like a directed teaching course if there is one. If there isn't one, we can work to try to figure out whether we can help create one for your department or program. So if you want to work with the UTA and you don't have something like that in your department, let me know. I do see you've listed here also per faculty independent study. That might also be an option. In some departments, they do this for like on a paid basis. And I will say, I think that's also okay. I think it's just best that people don't get paid and get credit, right? So you either get credit or you get paid. And I think that's a departmental preference. Okay. And then Rachel said, one of my colleagues suggested 6 to 10 UTAs. We have no grad 2 days TAs. I see a rec of 1 to 2. How many is too many? I don't know that you can have too many, except that you do have to manage them, right? So I will say, I think it just depends on what you want to have them do. Again, I'm going to go back to my same answer, Rachel. I think, will you have enough work for that many undergrad TAs? And are they doing 3 credits or are they doing 1 credit, right? So if they're doing 3 credits, that seems like a lot to me. Jen Cousins, do you have an advice about that? How many UTAs have you worked with at a time?
Hi, everybody. I also teach Intro to Psych, a 400-person class. I typically have 4 to 5 UTAs. 5 is a lot, a lot to kind of keep track of. One of the things that I work with them on are they get to pick individual projects based on the number of credits that they're doing. So sometimes they may have a topic, or like some of the students are working in a research lab and they put together a few slides and present it to the students. So that's like one thing that they can do. They all take notes and share those with the grad TA, and then those get posted on Canvas. But sometimes I give little like surveys in class, and they'll help me develop those surveys and help analyze the data to present the class with their data. So I often have to meet with them individually for their projects that they work on. The projects are to help give them a learning experience and something that they say that they have done, right? So for me, sometimes more than 5 is I can't do more than 5. 4 is probably better. They don't do grading. Everything is kind of on Canvas. I saw also ask about proctor exams. I do use them in that capacity. So yeah, typically 4 is good. If it meets with our schedules, which is hard, we have meetings, but if not, I do what Natasha does, is try to meet with them before or after class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say I do think that would be a lot. Anyone else who's worked with UTAs before who wants to share insights, tips? And stop sharing.
I worked with a UTA for the first time, and I also had them look through the assignments that I had already developed, I realized I didn't have them as standardized as I would like. So I had her help with that, and she also ran my, sorry, my dog's insisting on coming at the same time. Come on. There we go. Running the reviews and things like that. I do have a question though. I'm teaching 2 sections of the same class. Would you recommend having 2 different TAs for each section, or a different TA for each section, or could it be one TA for both sections?
So I use different ones for each section, mainly because the work I'm having them do increases with the number of students. So if it's scaling with the number of students, then I really feel like it's unfair to have them do like the work of two classes. If you were only having them like write questions or do other things that wouldn't scale, maybe that would be okay. But I probably wouldn't do that because then you'd also be like asking them to come to two different classes. So I don't know. I don't know if others have done that before, but I have not done that. Um, so I just want to let me get to this one comment in the chat, and then John, I will come to you. So there's a question about can a UTA grade low stakes submissions, like an assignment where a student gets a point or two for just having done it and having done it correctly or properly? Without anonymization. So to me, this breaks the rule, right? Like I think our rule is going to be, given what I talked about with Adriana, is that they can't do grading, right? And this because they have to check for accuracy, this seems like it's grading. Whereas if it's just counting or something like that, I think it's not. I do think that what we will be sure to do when the policy does appear, the new policy goes on the website, there will be a lot of explanation that reflects the chat here today. So I will share with Adriana the kinds of questions that came up, and we will certainly have a conversation about what she wants, the rules to be. We will discuss, and that will be reflected in like a Q&A or part of the policy so it's clear what people can and cannot have UTAs do. In terms of whether different rules apply to paid positions, I am not aware of different rules applying to paid positions. There may be different rules in different schools, right? So our policy applies to Dietrich school classes. So if this is computer science, I don't know. Like that's a whole different thing. But I will certainly make sure Adrian is aware of the question. Okay, John, thanks for your patience.
Sure, no problem. I don't know how much this applies to most of the people that are here, but I just wanted to point out that in film and media studies, like I teach production courses, we only have 15 students in a course. So I don't use UTAs for grading. I use them as I consider it a leadership position. So, they come into a production course, they've already made films, they've done stuff, they've experienced stuff, and they can bring that experience to the students in less advanced classes. And it kind of gives them a modeling of professionalism. That's one of the things I really find important in UTAs, but of course, I don't have to deal with like hundreds of papers. So for me, part of the deal is they have to do a presentation on a film they've done. And for instance, not to get too deep in the weeds, producing, no one knows what a producer does. And students who are more advanced have had to deal with that. So they usually do here's what I did on my film as a producer, or here's what I did on someone else's film. So I really think it's a real opportunity to give them a position of leadership and a position where they can model for the beginning students what it means to be like an advanced or professional student in this situation. Just wanted to add that.
That's really helpful. I think thinking of it as a leadership position is a really nice frame. And I think that's actually very consistent with the way that I think about it in my classes as well. Although I don't think I've ever articulated it as nicely. So I've actually had my students give a lecture or part of a lecture. An hour and 15 minutes is a really long time for an undergrad to give a lecture, but a portion of a lecture in classes, and it's been really a nice experience, I think. So I do think you can consider it in that way, and I think really like interview the students for the position and treat it like it's an honor to be a UTA, and I do think you should do that, and be careful who you choose, of course. Yeah, Michelle. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm getting used to Zoom again. As I said, I've had good experience with UTAs in the past. I started it with when we went the pandemic because with the breakout rooms, I wanted someone there, and I had a great person. I worked with her 3 times, over 3 semesters. She was fantastic. Then when I went back into in person, because of the pandemic with all the podcasts, I did what's called the flipped classroom, which
Mhm.
means that I'm also I use that only for 35-person classes. So it's a
Mhm.
small class, but it's still a very discussion based. And then I also use that TA to be part of a group so that,
Mhm.
just so that so there'll be 2 of us. So if we have, let's say, a class of 35, small groups of 5, there'll be about 7 groups per class, and then me and another UTA. So 2 out of the 7 groups, maximum 7 groups, would have someone there who already has some previous knowledge because the UTA has already taken the class in the past, and as you said, they feel more comfortable asking the peers, certain questions because they don't feel like they're asking stupid questions.
Yeah.
And as you said, the UTA often has better answers or has better knowledge of the classroom. So I've had a great experience, but I've heard from other colleagues, particularly colleagues who've used UTAs for larger classes. So in art and I'm in
Mhm.
history, the larger classes are like 80. The problem there sometimes, and this is maybe something, I only mention this because you and Adriana are thinking about
Mhm.
revising the guidelines and maybe also give the guidelines and also maybe giving people advice. There is a problem sometimes that some UTAs start helping other people in the class, either because they're friends or they become friends with
Mhm.
them. And, sometimes like by giving answers or, just helping them in different ways. And I'm wondering if you and Adriana have any thoughts about how to deal with those kind of situations, which I think is more likely to happen in a larger class, because then there are many more people who are not going to be part of that informal network, that is not always very obvious to the instructor.
Yeah. Jen, do you have an answer for this one? You've probably used UTAs more recently than me.
I definitely have, and with all of them, when I meet with them, so I usually meet with everybody individually, and then we meet all together as a group before the semester starts. And I always make it very clear to them that this is a leadership position and you are required to do these types of things, and so this might be obvious, but I just want to clarify that you are not to give answers. You are not, because you will have access to the exams and you're not to share that information. So I haven't noticed any of that particularly. I have had UTAs that had friends who were in the class,
Mhm.
and when I have noticed that, I've just paid attention, but I haven't noticed any overreaching. I also do limit like the amount of time that the students can see the exam. So I still use paper exams with Scantrons, and the only time they see them is when they're stuffing the exam. So they
Mhm.
don't have electronic copies or anything like that they could potentially share with them. So I do make a point to make it very clear to them that this is really important in their role. And most of the time, the UTs are really good at, they want that position, and they want to do a good job. So I haven't really encountered anything like that.
Yeah, I would echo that. When I've asked for feedback on things, I've done it with limited time before, and also, with kind of it would be very hard, I think, for them to kind of I don't know how you'd convey to someone like, oh, she's going to ask about this. Like, if you, sure, I mean, there's actually a study guide, so I mean, they should know what I'm going to ask about. So I don't know how they would share information from that, and I don't give them answers. They would have to work that all out on their own. Anyway, I try to limit the way that they could get information. I do encourage them to work individually with students, particularly students who are having trouble. So when students are struggling, I say things like, and this is to someone's question that was like, how do you encourage students to engage with the UTA? I say, out loud, like, we have these UTAs. They've done very well in this class already. They are a resource for you. Just remember, if you need anything, they're here. And then I remind them of that when they get their grades from exam one. and exam two, and they start to worry. And then when we have students who come and are very nervous about their grades, I say, like, I think it would be really great if you worked with so and so. And then I pair them up and then they work together. And they're kind of like a mini tutor in the class. If someone expresses that they really want to work like one-on-one with someone, that's probably not going to work super well with the grad TA who has all these other responsibilities. So I pair them up with the undergrad TAs. And then they hear, like they tell their friends and they tell their friends, and then everybody knows how great they are. And then the next thing you know, their like office hours are full and everything's great. So it's very organic after an initial push. So that's how I get them to engage. I also think having them present, if you can do it early in the semester, helps expose the students to the UTA, which was another question from Rachel. So I do think, having them, even if they don't want to present on content, if they just want to stand up there and talk about their trajectory, right? That's also helpful, just so that they know who they are. I think this can be really useful. And yeah, I don't know. I've had something else, but it went out of my head, so I'm going to stop. Did that answer you, Michelle? Yeah, I think though it is important for us to be aware that it is not a universally positive experience, right? Like there are times that there are problems. And so one thing that I've kind of always done is to have like to err on the side of having just a little bit more help than what I need in case somebody turns out to like have an issue or not be as good as I hoped. So, which is not to say I expect people to not be good, but I really need my students to have what they need. And we all need it to go smoothly, right? So I try to have coverage so that there are not any gaps or problems. And then if there's a little bit of extra coverage, that's okay. So I will say I do. When I said like 1 to 2 earlier to that question for a class of 140, I would take 2 for sure. Because if you have 1 and something happens, then you have 0. So that's, right. So when UTAs enroll for credit, is it letter graded? So in our department, it is pass fail, I believe. Yeah. And I don't know if there are any departments that do it as a letter grade. I mean, we do directed research as a letter grade option now. Um, I I think it's fine to have this be pass fail, personally, but I like research being a letter grade, so it's a very different experience. Andrew.
In classics, we give a letter grade.
Okay.
Also too, it came up earlier in the chat. Somebody said, "Can you reuse UTAs over and over again?"
Mhm.
In classics, they sign up for a course. It's like classics
Okay.
1990 or something like that.
Hmm.
So since they take it as a course, and you can't have the
Okay.
same course repeated on your transcript. I've
Okay.
been told that it's kind of like a one and done.
One and done. Got it.
Yeah, but also and they get a letter grade. So yeah, so there's just two things from the 15th floor from classics.
Right. That's super interesting. Okay. So in our department, you get this, it's like a directed teaching, but you can only, so many of those will count for anything, right? So there's sort of like filler credits or like, I don't know, elective credits, but then after that, they're not going to count for anything. So you could keep doing it theoretically, but it's at some point really not going to help you as a student. So I think that's an important thing. Okay, Nare says, I teach computational courses and it really helps my UTAs to see my homework project feedback to individual students. So, okay. Oh, this is a great question. So is it okay to share grading feedback with UTAs for this purpose so they know how to help them? So I think it's probably okay if you don't share the grade. But I'm gonna find out for you. I'm gonna get you a really 100% solid answer. Um, I think that, seeing what kind of feedback students get is probably okay, but really it's about the grade. Seeing grades is like what we're not supposed to do. Okay, and in English, they get letter grades. Okay, very interesting. Ruth.
Hi, thank you so much, Natasha. This has been super helpful. I just wanted to add another idea of kind of giving UTAs visibility. One of the classes that I'm using UTAs in is in Intro to Psych, and that can be a little intimidating for a UTA to go up and teach.
Oh yeah.
So one thing that I've done in developmental psych at the early part of the semester was I asked my UTAs to present one study tip that they personally used when they took that class themselves. So it could be just a study tip that other undergrads, excuse me, might not have used before. Or I also told them if there's a resource on campus that you've utilized that you really like that helped you in this course.
Oh, I love that.
Let the other students know about that. But they still come up to the front. The other students see them. They get a sense of these are people that are here for me that can help me somehow.
That's really great. I love that.
So slightly less terrifying option, maybe.
Yeah, lecturing to 400 or even 100 or even 30 people can be really intimidating when you're a faculty member, never mind an undergrad. So
yes.
Thanks.
And it just gets them up there a little bit earlier in the semester too. It doesn't take time for them to prep a lecture.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. I really like that. That's great. Okay. The student can decide whether to take it for letter grade or pass fail. And that's part of the determination for how much work they're asked to do. And they can only count up to 3 credits in the major. Okay, they can do more than one. It's because they see a value to it or need credits, right? Okay, that's really nice, John. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's sort of the credit thing is sort of similar to, I think, what would end up happening eventually in psychology. But in terms of the grading, I don't think we give them an option for grading for this. So that's interesting. I don't think there's a problem with there being variability across departments and programs with the letter grade, things like that. I don't think that's an issue. I think really where we're looking at policy here is about things around grading, which, are very tricky. And so that is where I will make sure, I feel like we're walking away maybe with more questions than answers, but I'm going to work on getting us answers to those things. And I can certainly share out resources about, like anonymizing, VLOOKUP, things like that. And I know, for folks who don't work with Excel, I work with Excel literally every day. I dream in spreadsheets, and happily so. And I think for people who don't work with spreadsheets every day, that can be more intimidating or annoying. So I'm happy to run another session where we, go through, click by click how we would anonymize, how we would relink. So I'm very happy to do that. And obviously it's May 15th, and so probably that would be in August. So I can, announce a session for around August 15th-ish. So we can have a session as we resume, and that might give people, a more confidence feeling about, how that they could really confidently link things. Andrew has nightmares about Excel spreadsheets every night. That's funny. I could see that, but I don't have them. Great. Okay. Other thoughts, questions? If there's anything you haven't thought of now, but you think of later that you want to have me talk to Adriana about, definitely just send me a note. And otherwise, I'll feel free to, ask questions and we'll get everything resolved. This recording will go live on the website for undergraduate studies where there are the assistant dean recordings. So this will all be there so that if you have, something that you are like, oh, wait, what happened with that? You can double check. Or if someone missed it and you want to refer them to this, they can see it. Also happy to share just the slides if you prefer. So just let me know. And I think maybe we're out of questions. Everyone wants an extra 10 minutes. Okay, Robert, the slides. Okay, I will send you the slides, Robert. Great. Thank you all very much for being here. This was really a productive discussion. I really think you helped, and thanks very much. Have a great day. Thanks, Jen.